On June 17, 1930, Herbert Hoover sat at his desk in the Oval Office and signed a bill that 1,028 economists had begged him to veto. Within 6 months, global trade would crater. Within 2 years, the men who wrote the bill would be voted out of office in humiliating defeats. And within 4 years, the law itself would be effectively dismantled. But the damage was permanent. This is the story of how a single piece of legislation, born from economic panic, forged in political calculation, and passed through a system designed to reward the loudest voices, turned a severe recession into the Great Depression. This is the story of money, power, systems, and consequences. This is the story of the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. To understand why this law happened, you have to follow the money. And in the 1920s, the money was hemorrhaging out of American agriculture. The First World War had been the greatest windfall in the history of American farming. European demand for American wheat, cotton, pork, and beef had surged to levels never seen before. Farmers expanded aggressively. They borrowed from banks to buy more land in the Great Plains. They purchased tractors, combines, and mechanical harvesters on credit. They planted fence line to fence line, believing that the golden age of agricultural prices would last forever. It didn't. When the war ended in 1918, European production recovered with shocking speed. At the same time, American farmers had become so efficient, so mechanized, so productive, that they were now flooding the market with supply. The result was a price collapse of historic proportions. Between 1920 and 1921, the price of wheat fell from over $2 a bushel to less than $1. Cotton, which had sold for 35 cents a pound during the war, dropped below 12 cents. Corn, hogs, beef, every major commodity followed the same trajectory. Farm income, which had peaked at nearly $17 billion in 1919, plummeted to $10 billion by 1921. And here is the critical point. It never recovered. Through the entire decade of the 1920s, while the rest of the country enjoyed the roaring 20s, American farmers remained in a depression of their own. By 1928, the agricultural sector was drowning in debt. Farmers who had borrowed $200 an acre for land now found that land worth half that amount. Banks in farm states were failing at alarming rates. Foreclosures were becoming common. The farm crisis was not an abstraction. It was a daily reality of auctions, evictions, and ruined families. And here is where the economic logic began to twist. The solution proposed by farm state politicians was deceptively simple. Raise tariffs on agricultural imports, keep foreign wheat, foreign cotton, foreign beef out of the American market, protect domestic prices, save the farm. But tariffs do not work that way. A tariff raises the price of goods you import. It does not raise the price of goods you export. American farmers were not struggling because cheap Canadian wheat was flooding American grocery stores. They were struggling because they had overproduced, because global supply had surged, and because the prices they received on world markets had collapsed. A tariff on imports would not fix that. What it would do is provoke retaliation. Foreign nations would respond by raising tariffs on American exports, the very exports that farmers depended upon for their livelihood. The economic logic was backwards, but the political logic was irresistible. In 1928, Herbert Hoover had campaigned on a promise to raise agricultural tariffs. It was not a radical position. Both parties had flirted with protectionism for decades. But Hoover needed the Farm Belt to win, and the Farm Belt wanted tariffs. He made the promise. And once elected, the promise became a legislative vehicle. Senator Reed Smoot of Utah and Representative Willis Hawley of Oregon took the lead. Smoot chaired the powerful Senate Finance Committee. Hawley chaired the House Ways and Means Committee. Both men represented agricultural constituencies. Both understood that a tariff bill could be transformed from a narrow farm relief measure into something far more ambitious. A comprehensive reorganization of American trade policy that would protect not just farmers, but virtually every industry that could muster a lobbyist. What followed was one of the most intense lobbying campaigns in the history of the United States Congress. Over 1,000 registered lobbyists descended on Washington. They represented steel mills in Pittsburgh, textile factories in New England, chemical plants in New Jersey, lumber operations in the Pacific Northwest, shoe manufacturers in Massachusetts, and glassmakers in Ohio. Every industry with a foreign competitor and a campaign contribution showed up with a specific request: raise the tariff on my product and I will deliver the votes. The process by which this happened reveals the inner workings of the system. A tariff bill is not written by economists. It is written in committee rooms, line by line, rate by rate, through a practice called log rolling. Senator, I will support your tariff on wool if you support my tariff on chemicals. Representative, I will vote for your dairy protection if you vote for my lumber duties. Each trade seems reasonable in isolation. Each constituency seems deserving, but the aggregate is staggering. The bill that Smoot-Hawley introduced in 1929 was already expansive. By the time it emerged from committee in 1930, it was monstrous. It contained tariff increases on more than 20,000 individual products. Average rates on dutiable imports would rise to nearly 50%, the highest level in American history. Some items faced duties of 100% or more. The tariff schedule ran to hundreds of pages, a labyrinth of rates and classifications that even its authors could not fully comprehend. The system was functioning exactly as designed. It was aggregating private economic interests into public policy. The problem was that no one was aggregating the costs. No one was calculating what would happen when Canada retaliated. No one was modeling what would occur when European markets closed. The system responded to the pressure in front of it. The lobbyist in the hallway, the campaign check in the envelope, the constituent letter in the mail. It had no mechanism for weighing second-order consequences, no institutional memory of the last time America had tried this, and no political incentive to say no. By the spring of 1930, the bill had passed both houses of Congress with overwhelming majorities. It was now on the president's desk, and for the first time, the opposition had found its voice. On May 5, 1930, a petition arrived at the White House signed by 1,028 economists from across the country. They came from Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, Chicago, Stanford, and dozens of other institutions. They represented classical economists and institutionalists, Republicans and Democrats, theorists and practitioners. Their message was unprecedented in its unanimity: veto this bill. They laid out the argument with devastating clarity. Tariffs, they wrote, would provoke foreign retaliation. They would raise prices for American consumers. They would disrupt supply chains and increase costs for American manufacturers who relied on imported raw materials. They would choke off the export markets that American farmers needed most. They would deepen the depression rather than relieve it. We cannot, the petition concluded, hope to restore prosperity by restricting trade. The business community joined the chorus. Henry Ford, the most famous industrialist in America, called the bill economic stupidity. Thomas Lamont, a senior partner at J.P. Morgan and one of the most powerful bankers on Wall Street, later admitted that he had gone to the White House and almost went down on my knees to beg Herbert Hoover to veto the asinine Hawley-Smoot tariff. The Wall Street Journal editorialized against it. The Chamber of Commerce opposed it. Even some manufacturers who stood to benefit from protection publicly warned that the costs would exceed the gains. Hoover was genuinely torn. He was not an ideologue. He was an engineer by training, a technocrat by reputation, a man who had built his career on rational analysis and efficient systems. He knew the bill was bad economics. He knew the economists were right. The bill that had reached his desk was a Frankenstein's monster of special interest provisions, far removed from the agricultural relief he had campaigned on. But here is the calculus of power in a democracy under stress. The bill had passed Congress with overwhelming support from his own party. To veto it would be to split the Republican coalition at the exact moment the economy was deteriorating. The stock market had crashed 8 months earlier, in October 1929. Unemployment was rising, banks were failing, foreclosures were spreading. To reject the bill would be to appear indifferent to the suffering of farmers and manufacturers. It would be portrayed as a betrayal of his campaign promise. It would be political suicide. On June 17, 1930, Herbert Hoover signed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act into law. He issued a statement expressing reservations. He called the bill imperfect. He said he was signing it only because he had promised tariff relief to the American people and because he believed some protection was necessary in extraordinary times. But he signed it. The system had spoken, and the system had failed. The retaliation was immediate, targeted, and devastating. Canada, the United States' largest trading partner, struck within weeks. Ottawa imposed retaliatory tariffs on 16 major American exports, including agricultural products, automobiles, and manufactured goods. The message was deliberate and unmistakable. If you wall off your market, we will wall off ours. Canadian Prime Minister R.B. Bennett made it explicit. This was not diplomacy, this was economic warfare. European nations followed in rapid succession. France raised tariffs on American automobiles and machinery. Italy imposed duties on American wheat and cotton. Spain targeted American automobiles and agricultural equipment. Switzerland, historically a free trading nation, retaliated against American watches and precision instruments. Britain, the historic champion of free trade, abandoned a century of policy and erected an imperial preference system that explicitly discriminated against American goods in favor of imports from the British Empire. Germany's response was perhaps the most consequential. Already reeling from war reparations, the collapse of American lending, and the rigid constraints of the gold standard, Germany retreated further into economic nationalism. The trade war accelerated the fragmentation of the global economy into competing blocs. Each nation sought self-sufficiency. Each tariff begat another tariff. The spiral was self-reinforcing and self-destructive. The numbers tell the story with brutal clarity. In 1929, total American exports stood at $5.2 billion. By 1932, they had collapsed to $1.7 billion, a decline of more than two-thirds. Imports fell from $4.4 billion to $1.3 billion over the same period. The global trading system, which had already been strained by war debt, reparations, and the gold standard, now faced a coordinated contraction. World trade, measured in total volume, fell by roughly 25% between 1929 and 1932. Economists still debate precisely how much of that decline can be attributed to Smoot-Hawley versus the broader collapse in demand. But there is broad agreement that the tariff war accounted for a significant portion of the contraction, and that it transformed a synchronized global downturn into a fragmented nationalist disaster. And then there was unemployment. When Hoover signed the bill in June 1930, American unemployment stood at roughly 8%. By the end of 1930, it had reached 16%. By 1932, it would hit 25%. Correlation is not causation. The Depression had many fathers: the stock market crash, the banking crisis, the gold standard, the collapse of consumer spending, the contraction of the money supply. But Smoot-Hawley made everything worse. It raised the cost of imported raw materials for American manufacturers. It provoked foreign retaliation that destroyed export markets for American farmers and factories. It signaled to the world that the largest economy on Earth was retreating behind its borders at the exact moment international cooperation was most desperately needed. The political consequences arrived with equal force. In the 1932 elections, both Reed Smoot and Willis Hawley were defeated. Smoot lost his Senate seat in Utah, a state he had represented for 3 decades, by a crushing margin. Hawley lost his House seat in Oregon. The voters had rendered their verdict. The architects of the most protectionist tariff in American history had been expelled from the very political system they had manipulated. Hoover fared no better. He was swept from office in a landslide, carrying only 6 states against Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Roosevelt, campaigning on a platform that included trade liberalization and international cooperation, won 42 states and the presidency. The political order that had produced Smoot-Hawley was demolished. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act was effectively repealed by the Reciprocal Trade Agreements Act of 1934, which gave the president authority to negotiate tariff reductions without requiring congressional approval for each individual rate. It was a direct acknowledgement that the old system was broken. Average tariff rates would fall steadily over the following decades. The General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, signed in 1947, and its successor, the World Trade Organization, would build institutional guardrails designed to prevent exactly the kind of unilateral tariff escalation that Smoot-Hawley had unleashed. But the lesson was learned at enormous cost. The law did not cause the Great Depression. The Depression was already underway when Hoover signed it. Stock markets had crashed. Credit had frozen. Agricultural prices had been falling for a decade. But Smoot-Hawley took a severe crisis and made it catastrophic. It transformed a domestic recession into a global trade war. It demonstrated how a system designed to respond to constituent pressure could produce outcomes that harmed everyone, including the very constituents it was meant to protect. It showed how money, declining farm incomes, corporate lobbying budgets, campaign contributions could be converted into political power, and how that power, operating through the machinery of Congress, could generate consequences that no individual actor intended or desired. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act is not a story of villains. It is a story of systems. A system in which economic pain becomes political demand, in which political demand becomes legislative compromise, in which legislative compromise becomes law, and in which law, once enacted, escapes the control of those who created it. Herbert Hoover signed that bill believing he was managing a crisis. Instead, he accelerated it. The 1,028 economists were right, the lobbyists were wrong, and the system, for a brief and terrible moment, failed to tell the difference. This is ledger power.